4 days out from the U.S. presidential election, and the pollsters have the race on a knife edge. But could the Biden administration's role in the genocide in Gaza and Kamala Harris's complicity in that cost her come Election Day? The Israeli journalist, embedded with the country's military, happy to have blood on his hands. And the Washington Post and the LA Times both refuse to endorse Harris over Donald Trump. Their billionaire owners don't want to rile Trump in case he wins. With the U.S. presidential election just around the corner, the race for the White House is still too close to call. For the Democratic Party establishment, it wasn't supposed to be this way. When Vice President Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden, putting a fresh face on the ticket, she rode a wave of media attention and seemed to have the upper hand against Donald Trump. Now, the party is scrambling, trying to appeal to some key demographics. They include Arab American and Muslim American voters, above all, those in Michigan, a swing state that could decide the outcome. In normal times, most of Michigan's Arab American community votes Democrat. But the outrage over the genocide in Gaza and the Biden administration's involvement in it has those voting blocs leaning towards Trump. Considering the former president's own support for Israel and his record of anti-Muslim bigotry, it is a sign of desperation within elements of the U.S. electorate. For many Arab and Muslim voters, U.S. policies in the Middle East are personal, rebounding on them in the form of rising hate crimes, some of them fueled by dangerous rhetoric on the American airwaves. Take a look under the hood of the Democratic Party's electoral machine, and what you will find is panic.
If you're a Muslim American and you're upset about what's happening in the Middle East, why would you put your faith in somebody who passed a Muslim ban?
Why else would they be pulling out all the stops, using party bigwigs to appeal to Arab Americans and Muslim Americans who 1 year into a genocidal war on Gaza that the Biden administration has effectively backed are abandoning Kamala Harris and planning to vote for Donald Trump?
Kamala Harris has said that she will try to negotiate an end to the violence, an end to the killing, and a new peace process, and that ought to be enough.
They've seen the polling. It's neck and neck, with more Arab Americans favoring Trump than Harris.
Donald J. Trump will be the 47th president of the United States of America,
including in swing states that could decide this election. Samraa Luqman is one of them. She is from Michigan and says she's not just voting for Trump, she is campaigning for him.
For me, it really was all about strategic voting and how to ensure that the Democrats were held accountable for the over 250,000 lives lost. It is a protest vote. I am extremely liberal. I ran as a Democrat in a local election. So to find myself endorsing the vote for Trump goes to show you how bad the Democrats are losing and bleeding Arab American and progressive Democrat support.
A lot of members of the Arab American community have family members in Gaza, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, all over the Middle East, victims of the US-backed Israeli aggression and genocide. And so to say that Muslim Americans and Arab Americans are upset or frustrated would be the understatement of the century.
The dilemma for Arab and Muslim voters is really primarily how to advance their anti-war agenda. They're horrified about what is happening in Gaza and now in Lebanon and possibly the broader region. Watching how the Biden administration has provided unconditional support to the Israeli government and asking themselves, what should they do?
Democrats cannot say they haven't been warned. 9 months ago, they saw Arab American activists form an uncommitted movement that has since signed up hundreds of thousands of people who promise to withhold their votes unless Democrats change course on Gaza. Then that movement watched the Democratic National Convention, the one that crowned Kamala Harris, where not a single defender of Palestinian rights was given the chance to speak about an ongoing genocide. The Trump campaign is trying to make the most of this, which, given Donald Trump's own history of supporting Israel and his 2017 ban on immigration from Muslim-majority countries, is shameless. But since when has that ever stopped him? Trump is now cultivating the votes of Arab and Muslim Americans through posts like this one.
Trump is actually trying to court Arab and Muslim voters in these final weeks in Michigan and elsewhere. And he's actually appeared on stage with various Muslim figures.
You know what they want? They want peace. They're great people.
And even if you don't buy a single word that he says, and I personally don't myself, the fact that he's actually making the effort, he's doing that when Kamala Harris isn't. So people are taking note of that.
Donald Trump, whether on foreign policy or domestic policy, I mean, it was chaos here. For 4 years, our children were watching somebody on TV saying that Muslims hate us.
We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism.
I don't know how psychologically, emotionally, and perhaps from a safety perspective, our community can function and thrive, let alone advocate on foreign policy with somebody like Donald Trump in office.
They tell us things like, well, if Trump comes into office, Gaza will be destroyed completely and settlements will be expanded. Well, what do you think is happening right now? If Democrats are going to continue the status quo, I have a 100% probability that this genocide is continuing. But if there is even a 1% chance that Trump might bring peace to the Middle East, then I'm willing to take that 1% chance. Because right now, the status quo is absolutely unacceptable.
That status quo in this American election year features more and more rhetoric from the extreme right. Donald Trump's rally last week at Madison Square Garden provided a case in point.
We must crush jihad!
And it's not limited to the political realm. Ever since 9/11, Americans have grown used to seeing anti-Muslim voices on their news channels. But since the October 7th attacks, that kind of bigotry has surged on the airwaves. Take this moment on CNN from this past week, when a Muslim journalist, Mehdi Hassan, who hosts a program on Al Jazeera, was the butt of a vile joke from a right-wing panelist about those Israeli pager attacks in Lebanon.
I never called you an anti-Semite. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I don't.
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians. I'm used to it.
Yeah, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is that
you just say I should die.
You
should not.
No, I said
you just said
no.
I should be killed.
No, I did not say that. I said, no, I did not say that.
CNN removed the panelist from the broadcast and apologized for what was said.
I couldn't believe it when I saw that clip. And it does show that those kinds of sentiments, they have become normalized, where you can talk about Arabs and Palestinians as if they're just like lesser beings.
They're Arab Nazis. That's what the Palestinians are.
The sense of seeing Arabs being kind of uncivilized or barbaric, where Israel is the outpost of Western liberalism in the Sea of the Middle East.
You're not Hamas. Israel is a democracy and as a Jewish state supports and believes in every life mattering.
And those are the kinds of tropes that we hear time and time again.
It was a bit incredulous to see, the shock on Abby Phillipps' face, for example, and the reaction of people online. But when you look at CNN's track record, and even Abby Phillipps herself parroting Israeli propaganda and unverified claims of, Hamas beheading Israeli babies, which she did and later took down, but did not actually end up apologizing for. This type of anti-Muslim, Islamophobic, anti-Arab rhetoric has become so normalized. It's not shocking that that happened, and it's also not surprising that CNN even allowed that person to be on their panel in the first place.
So normalized that similar talk has come out of the Biden-Harris administration through its special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstadt, just a few days after those pager attacks.
After October 7th, there was a feeling around the world that Israel is weaker. And in the
you want a beeper?
At least CNN acted like it cared, removing that panelist. Lipstadt still has her job. The Biden administration did not even comment on the incident. Up against all of that, is it any wonder that Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, or any American with a conscience is open to voting for Donald Trump or the independent third-party candidate, Jill Stein? Politicians can be very calculating. So too can voters.
My thinking really is a political strategy. In order to hold an administration accountable for a genocide, what is the best way to ensure that Harris loses the election? If she loses a voter to Stein, she's down one. But if she loses a voter and that voter votes for Trump, then she is down 2 votes. So to hold the administration accountable for the genocide, I made a conscious decision to vote for Trump.
And these feelings are not going to go away after Election Day. The Democratic Party, whether they win or lose, they are probably going to have to work for decades to regain the trust of these voters. And it's not because of the voters who decided to vote third party. They've had a year to change it, and they've chosen not to.
As voting day approaches, U.S. media outlets and some of their billionaire owners are bracing themselves for a possible Trump victory. 2 national newspapers have broken with tradition. They're refusing to endorse a candidate, and now they're feeling the blowback. Meenakshi Ravi is here with more.
This past week, within a 24-hour period, both the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times announced they would not be endorsing either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the presidential election. Such endorsements are traditional in U.S. politics, and the reactions were significant. Many staff members who remained went public with their criticism. The Washington Post's opinions editor called it a stab in the back. The LA Times' outgoing editorials editor wrote, "How could we spend 8 years railing against Trump and then fail to endorse the perfectly decent Democrat challenger who we previously endorsed for the U.S. Senate?" More than 200,000 Washington Post customers canceled their subscriptions, while the LA Times saw its paid readership plummet by 20%. The billionaire owners of the 2 papers both deny ordering their editorial teams to drop the endorsements. Jeff Bezos, the executive chairman of Amazon, had a piece published in the Washington Post saying, "What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias. Ending them is a principled decision." Patrick Soon-Shiong, owner of the LA Times, who made his money through the healthcare sector, agreed. His daughter claimed the Biden administration's policy on Gaza was a motivating factor in the non-endorsement of Harris, though her father then denied that. Whatever their stated reasons, the reality is that both billionaires have more to lose than just readers. They do big business with and under the watchful eye of the federal government. So why risk alienating Trump at a time when polls indicate Trump could soon be back in the White House? Putting aside the corporate fear factor and the suspicious timing of these decisions, this saga has led to a debate over the practice of U.S. newspapers endorsing candidates. Those endorsements rarely change voters' minds. What matters is the quality of journalism, and not just in election season.
Thanks, Meena. It's been more than 3 years since a military coup in Myanmar brought an end to a faltering democratic process there, and the generals now find themselves under attack by opposition forces across the country. The junta has suffered a series of unprecedented defeats, losing control of strategically important border regions to armed resistance groups representing ethnic minorities. The military has since resorted to indiscriminate bombing to crush resistance to its rule. Media organizations have continued to report, either surreptitiously in army-controlled areas or from elsewhere in the country or even abroad. One of those organizations is Mizzima, a media network that includes more than 20 TV, radio, and online platforms. Mizzima's work over the past 25 years has reflected Myanmar's struggle against military dictatorship. The Listening Post's Tarak Nafa produced this story on Mizzima, filmed in the southeastern state of Karen by videographer Aung Naing So.
In a secluded jungle location close to Myanmar's border with Thailand, a group of journalists met this past August for several weeks of training. They had traveled there from across the country, from regions under the authority of Myanmar's military junta, as well as those controlled by rebel resistance forces. The training program is run by Myanmar's largest independent news outlet, Mizzima. It aims to equip students with the skills they'll need to do their jobs in one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a reporter.
This training school is in Karen State, an area controlled by revolutionary ethnic armed groups. We couldn't even dream of opening such a media institute in military-controlled areas. We want to generate a new generation of journalists. There are less of us since the coup. The students are from all over Myanmar, and when they finish, they will take this knowledge back to their hometowns.
I was an average student before the coup. I didn't know much about journalism. I became a journalist only after the coup. When I heard that Mizzima was running this training, I thought it would support my work. I've learned how to write stories, I've learned how to verify news. They also taught me how to question the government officer in my state, which is really useful. And all this training is happening with a diverse group of different ages and ethnicities, people I can learn from.
Life for journalists in Myanmar was turned upside down in February 2021, when a military coup abruptly ended the country's decade-long experiment with democracy. The night before the coup, the generals plotted a media blackout. They unplugged Mizzima TV and another channel, DVD, from the country's terrestrial TV carrier. After the coup was announced on February 1st, Mizzima's journalists, like many others, went into hiding. After thousands of people across Myanmar came out to resist the military, phones in hand, the generals began implementing an information and internet blackout. What the junta had not accounted for was the level of pushback they would receive from citizens and journalists.
The military ordered the media not to use the word coup, but journalists asserted that a coup is a coup and continued using that terminology. The military did not expect such a response. They tried to stop this by cutting off internet access, banning Facebook, and shutting down the media. They took drastic measures like closing down bank accounts. Such actions are typically associated with authoritarian regimes like North Korea or Russia. The military believed that these measures would intimidate the population, but they underestimated both the resilience of the youth and the power of the media, which prevented the military from controlling the narrative.
I wrote editorials using the term coup. I didn't want to lie to the nation. The coup is illegal. It needed to be said. That's our job. As journalists, we had to consider whether we should leave the country or relocate to somewhere not under the control of the military. We expected our office would be raided, so everything important had been moved. When they got there, they found nothing, but they sealed off the office. After that, we asked our journalists to relocate either to liberated areas or neighboring countries. Some resigned. We didn't blame them. The work of journalism became a crime. We had to start from scratch. We didn't have editors. We didn't have an office. We went into the jungle and had no internet, no electricity.
7 of our journalists, including Mizzima's co-founder Dawn Tindin Aung, were arrested. One of them was brutally tortured and one person is still in prison. Anyone involved with Mizzima can be indicted for working with us. At a minimum, they could face 2 to 3 years imprisonment. Their families and friends are also at risk. Shortly after the coup, we stopped including bylines with journalists' real identities and started using pseudonyms. And we cut any connections between journalists operating underground in Yangon and those elsewhere in the country. That way, if one journalist is apprehended, they won't be able to disclose any links with the other.
Media workers face considerable risks if caught by the military. Many have been imprisoned under sweeping anti-state and false news laws, and at least 3 journalists have been killed while in the army's custody. It's part of what the UN has called a scorched earth policy against the unprecedented wave of opposition the junta faces across the country. Over the past year, the military has suffered a series of defeats and lost huge swathes of territory to ethnic armed resistance groups. It's now thought the junta controls less than 100 of Myanmar's 330 townships. Thousands have been killed and millions displaced in the fighting. There is a sense that the balance of power is shifting in favor of Myanmar's ethnic minorities in ways that will be difficult for the military to undo. Under pressure, the generals have resorted to a time-worn tactic of ethno-nationalist messaging to try to shore up support among the Burman majority, crude narratives that are delivered in sophisticated ways.
The architect of this psychological warfare project is Colonel Zhou Zojie. He got a PhD from a Russian university and he's smart. His unit is very organized and very good at technology. You see their presence mainly on Telegram and X. We monitored more than 180 Telegram channels. They create messaging that non-Buddhist religions are dangerous, Muslims are dangerous, Christians are dangerous, that they are doing a defensive war to protect Buddhism from other ethnic groups. So they use propaganda based on maintaining the Burma ethnic identity to cover up their atrocities.
There are Telegram channels like Kote and Shweneja that distribute so much propaganda from the military. They'll never post about the violations of the military, only good things. The problem is, many people have subscribed to those Telegram channels and many people like them.
The Myanmar military is acting like any dictatorship would. However, they now have more tools at their disposal. Technology they've obtained from China to block VPNs, monitoring software and CCTV for surveillance. They spread misinformation very enthusiastically. This reflects their belief that if they spread enough falsehoods, those lies may eventually be accepted as truth. A similar thing happened after Egypt's military coup. By creating uncertainty, the military can claim that they are the only ones capable of solving problems and protecting the country.
One reason the military's propaganda has not proven decisive in Myanmar is because of a young generation that is more tech-savvy and better informed. News outlets like Mizzima have also played their role. Mizzima's evolution over the years has tracked the country's tumultuous history with military rule. The outlet was founded in exile in 1998 with bases in India and Thailand. It has grown from a news service that operated on fax machines to a network with more than 20 platforms. In 2011, when a democratic transition began in Myanmar, the two men leading Mizzima, So Myin and Sein Win, who are brothers, took the decision to return home. Now they find themselves back where they started, reporting either covertly in Myanmar or in exile from neighboring countries.
I learned many lessons from my life. In Buddhism, it is taught that nothing is permanent. In this ever-changing world, we must be innovative to move forward. I believe that struggling against what is wrong can lead to victory and pave the way for positive change. We had a taste of democracy that lasted only a few years, so we must make twice the effort to achieve lasting change. The dictatorship will eventually fall, but we need to prepare in advance for what comes after. Mizzima's mission is also part of the nation-building process. No matter what role we play, we want to collaborate and be involved in this journey together.
And finally, throughout modern history, we have seen the news media in one country after another become part and parcel of a government's propaganda machine. The Israeli media have taken that problem to another level. We've seen it in the bloodthirsty calls coming out of Israeli news studios, not just from guests, but from those in the anchor chairs, celebrating a genocide that they're supposed to be covering. For Danny Kushmaro, a host for Channel 12 and a household name in Israel, endorsing war crimes, first in Gaza and now in Lebanon, hasn't been enough. So he actually took part in one, joining Israeli soldiers in an attack in a village in South Lebanon.
בית עם מחסן תחמושת, עם תצפית על ישראל, עלה באוויר, פחות איום אחד על מדינת ישראל. Don't mess with the Jews.
Now, here's how all of this might play out. The International Court of Justice, which is investigating Israel for what it calls a plausible case of genocide, will also look to indict elements of the Israeli media for incitement. And that name, Danny Kushmaro, will come up in the evidence. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.